Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are really stripping away the magic trick. You know, usually when we sit down and talk about animation, whether it's the golden age of Disney or the modern Renaissance, we always end up talking about the illusion of life.
Right, the soul of the character.
Exactly. We talk about acting and emotion, and all of that is obviously true and important, but today we are going straight into the engine room. We are looking at the physics, the mechanics, and frankly, just the structural engineering required to make a flat drawing look like it has an actual skeleton.
Yeah, it's definitely less about magic and a lot more about manual labor and intense observation today. We are digging back into the Animator's Survival Kit by Richard Williams, and specifically we are camping out in Chapter 10.
Chapter 10, which has a really simple title. It's just called Flexibility.
Right, simple title, but the content is, it's probably some of the most highly technical material we have ever covered on this deep dive.
It really is. And you know, flexibility sounds kind of soft. It sounds like yoga or stretching. But Williams presents this chapter almost like a battle plan. He starts right off by identifying the central conflict that literally every animator faces when they sit at the desk.
It's a war.
A total war between two extreme ends of the spectrum. On one side, you have what he calls the King Kong effect. And on the far other side, you have flashing or boiling.
Right. And to really grasp why this entire chapter is so foundational, you first have to understand why both of those extremes are complete failures in animation. So let's start with the King Kong side of things.
Positive side.
Exactly. When a beginner sits down to animate a character turning around or even just lifting an arm, their absolute first instinct is to move everything at once.
Because it feels like efficiency, right?
Yeah.
You think, okay, I start at frame 1 and I need to end at frame 10, so let's just move it all.
It is efficient on paper, but it is completely fatal to the actual performance. Think about it.
Yeah.
If the head, the shoulders, the elbows, the wrists, and the hips all start moving the exact same millisecond, and then they all stop at the exact same millisecond, you don't get a human being.
You get a brick.
You get a brick. You get a solid, rigid mass just sort of floating through space. It looks like a robot or a really stiff stop-motion puppet.
Mm-hmm.
That is the King Kong effect. It definitely has weight, sure, but it has absolutely zero life to it.
So then this student watches their pencil test and realizes this. They think, oh no, I don't want to be stiff. I want my character to be loose and fluid. And so they dramatically overcorrect.
They swing the pendulum all the way to the other side of the room. They start moving things randomly. They start stretching lines that have no structural business being stretched. And that directly leads to the second failure, which is flashing.
Which is also known as boiling right.
Yes. Boiling is the industry term for when the drawing itself feels completely unstable. Imagine a character just standing there talking to you, but their arm length is jittering slightly frame by frame, or the actual volume of their head is expanding and contracting like a breathing lung.
Just entirely losing them all.
Exactly. It's fluid, yes.
Yeah.
It is definitely not stiff anymore, but it's incredibly distracting. It looks like the character is made out of jelly or liquid. You completely lose the structural integrity of the skeleton.
So the real mission of Chapter 10, and really the mission of our entire deep dive today, is synthesis. How in the world do we get that rock-solid foundation of the King Kong model so the character feels real and substantial, but layer on the flexibility and the organic snap of the boiling model?
We are essentially hunting for the holy grail of animation here. A figure that has a solid, believable skeleton but possesses fleshy, organic movement. And what's great about Williams is he doesn't just pat you on the back and say, hey, practice makes perfect. He lays out highly specific mechanical devices to actually achieve this.
Which is what we're going to break down today. We're looking at the breakdown, drawing the concept of overlapping action, breaking the body into sections, and finally, the boss battle of the chapter, the successive breaking of joints.
Let's start right at the beginning with the first device, the breakdown. Now, just to get our standard animation terminology straight for everyone listening, you have your extremes. Position A is your starting pose. Position B is your ending pose.
Right, those are your key frames, the bookends of the action.
Correct. And the drawing that sits directly in the middle, literally the halfway point of the timeline, is the breakdown. Or sometimes it's called the passing position.
Okay, so here is where the trap is set. If you were just using pure logic, you look at position A, let's say our character is smiling happily, and then you look at position B where the character is suddenly frowning. Logic totally dictates that the middle drawing, the breakdown, should just be a face that is exactly halfway between a smile and a frown. Just a perfectly neutral face.
It's the mathematical average, the literal dead center.
And Williams absolutely hates it.
He despises it. He calls it dull. He says if you just use that logical middle, the character doesn't act. They just float from one emotion to the other. There's no texture to the movement. It just becomes a bland morph.
It totally reminds me of those early AI video morphs, where one face just seamlessly melts into another face. It's incredibly smooth, but it doesn't feel like a human decision was actually made.
Exactly. It completely lacks intent. And Williams brings in a quote from a master animator named Emery Hawkins right here. Hawkins gave Williams a piece of advice that apparently changed his entire approach to animation. Hawkins said, don't go from A to B. Go from A to X to B. Go somewhere ELSC in the middle.
Go somewhere else. That phrasing naturally implies taking a detour.
It implies that the middle of the action is an event. The breakdown isn't just a mathematical transition. It is the exact moment where the character reveals how they're reacting to something.
I think we really need to look at the visual examples from the book here because he illustrates this A to X to B concept with just a really simple face. Just a circle with eyes and a mouth. Smile to frown. The start and end drawings are completely identical in all these examples, but he drastically changes the feeling just by altering that single middle breakdown drawing.
Let's take the first one he shows, the delayed change.
Yeah.
In this breakdown drawing, Williams actually keeps the happy mouth. He literally just traces the smile from drawing A.
So the character is physically halfway through the timeline of the scene, but his face hasn't realized he's supposed to be sad yet?
Exactly. His body posture might be shifting downward. His eyes might be starting to change shape, but that mouth is stubbornly holding on to the smile. Then in the second half of the movement, it snaps instantly into the frown.
And what does that specifically do for the viewer watching it?
It creates vitality. It creates a sudden sense of realization. Sadness hits the character all at once. It's a snap change. Now, if you compare that to the second example, the advanced change.
Which I assume is the exact mechanical opposite.
It is. In the middle drawing for the advanced change, you jump straight to the frown immediately. You are heavily anticipating the final pose. So this reads to the audience as quick unhappiness. The character isn't hesitating or processing at all. They're diving head first into the negative emotion.
Then he gets into the breakdowns that actually start to distort the anatomy of the face. There is one he calls the distortion.
This is where we actively start breaking that rigidity of the model we talked about. And the breakdown here, instead of a smile or a frown, Williams pushes all the facial features way up on the head. He squashes the cheeks right up against the eyes. The mouth becomes this tiny, high little O shape.
It looks exactly like a cartoon gulp face.
Yeah, it's an anticipation tactic. It says, uh-oh. By pushing the features UP before dropping them heavily down into the final frown, you create a massive contrast in direction. Up, then down. That contrast adds so much physical weight to the sadness.
And then there's the one he calls the dip.
The dip is the vertical reverse of that. You drop the jaw way down in the middle drawing. You actively stretch the face vertically.
Looking at the still frame in the book, it looks like a ghost face. Like the character's face is literally melting off their skull for a split second.
In a single still image, it looks totally bizarre. If you pause the frame, you'd think it was a mistake. But in motion passing by your eyes at a 24th of a second, the brain doesn't see a melting monster. The eye just registers a rapid change of shape. It makes the face feel fleshy and real. It subconsciously tells your brain, this isn't a hard plastic mask. This is organic skin that has elasticity.
There's also the squash, where he squashes the whole face down like the character is blinking or thinking really hard before the reaction. But the core takeaway across all of these is that the breakdown is really where the acting happens. A and B are just your poses. The breakdown is the actual performance.
That is the absolute perfect way to put it. The breakdown is what stops the float. It anchors the transition in a specific psychological reality. But once you have that brilliant breakdown figured out, you instantly run into the next major mechanical problem. You can't just have every single part of the character's body hit that breakdown pose at the exact same time.
Because then we are right back to King Kong territory.
Exactly. If the eyes, the ears, the hair, and the mouth all hit the breakdown on frame 5 simultaneously, you're completely stiff again. Which perfectly leads us into section 2 of the chapter Overlapping Action.
Which Williams defines as movement within movement.
He brings in the legendary Ken Harris here. Ken Harris was a master animator at Warner Brothers. He worked on the Roadrunner, Bugs Bunny, basically all the untouchable classics. But Williams shares this incredibly revealing detail about him. Ken Harris was actually quite insecure about his own drawing ability.
Which frankly seems insane for a guy animating at that historic level.
You have to remember he was working shoulder to shoulder with draftsmen who were classically trained fine artists, guys who could draw a perfect anatomy in their sleep. Harris felt his actual pencil line work was a bit rougher, but he understood the physics of motion better than anyone alive. And because he was terrified of his drawings boiling or losing their solid volume if he tried to freehand redraw them too many times, he developed a brilliant workaround, a tracing technique.
Walk us through this tracing technique, because tracing sounds like a shortcut, but how does it actually help with creating flexibility?
Okay, let's set up a scenario. You have a character turning their head. Drawing A is facing left. Drawing B is facing right. You need a breakdown drawing right in the middle.
Got it.
A standard, highly confident animator might just try to freehand a brand new head turning in the middle. But if you get the cranial size even slightly wrong, the head will visually wobble when played back. Harris wouldn't risk that. He would literally take a fresh sheet of paper, put it directly over drawing A on his light desk, and just trace the head perfectly. But, and this is the entire secret, he would physically shift the top piece of paper slightly before tracing.
So he is physically moving the paper itself, not changing the drawing logic in his head.
Exactly. He's using the exact same structural lines of drawing A, but he is placing them in a slightly new physical position on the screen. This absolute guarantees that the volume of the head remains identical. It is literally the same drawing, just scooted over.
But wait, if you just trace and move the whole drawing evenly, it just looks like a flat cardboard cutout sliding across a table. That's not animation, that's just panning an image.
Exactly right. So here is where the overlap part of his genius trick comes in. He wouldn't trace the whole entire character all at once. Let's look at the man with a turban example from the text.
Okay, so the scenario is we have a character wearing a huge heavy cloth turban on his head, and he is leaning forward.
Right, so the core body leans forward into the new breakdown position. But for the turban, Harris would trace the turban from the start position. He would purposefully leave it behind in space.
So the head and torso are moving forward, but the hat is staying locked back where it was.
For just a few frames, yes. The rigid body leads the action. The soft turban drags behind because of its sheer weight and inertia. Then, as the body finally settles into the ending pose, the turban catches up and swings forward over the head.
And he achieved all of that complex secondary motion just by selectively shifting the paper around.
Mostly yes. By tracing different individual parts of the character from different drawings, tracing the solid body from the new forward position, but tracing the heavy turban from the old backward position, he effortlessly created this incredibly complex overlapping action.
It's staggeringly efficient.
It's pure genius. It perfectly solves the volume and boiling problem because you are tracing existing structural lines. And it completely solves the stiffness problem because you are separating the timing of the different elements.
There's another great example right next to that one, with a mouse, like a classic Jerry Mouse type design.
It uses the exact same principle. The mouse quickly turns his head to look at something. The solid skull and snout lead the turn. But the big, soft ears, or maybe a little tuft of hair on top, you just trace those specific parts from the previous drawing. You force them to drag.
It creates this distinct feeling of dough.
Dough is exactly the word Williams uses in the book. Or flesh. Think about the physics of it. Flesh isn't rigid plastic. If you suddenly whip your head around to look behind you, your cheeks actually lag behind your skull by a tiny fraction of a second. Your hair definitely does. This intentional drag tells the audience's brain that the character is made out of soft, organic, yielding material.
It also strongly implies air resistance, which I love.
Yes, it grounds the character in a physical world. If the huge mouse ears drag back as the head moves forward, it means the invisible air in the room is actively pushing against them. It gives the movement real-world weight.
So we have the breakdown to fix the dull timing. We have overlapping action to fix the stiffness of the accessories and flesh. Now we need to talk about the core mechanics of the body itself. Section 3 is all about breaking the body into sections.
Yes, the TV commercial man section.
Williams really goes after those 1950s TV commercials here with a vengeance.
He has a deep personal vendetta against the limited animation style of that specific era. He shows this diagram of a generic, square-jawed man in a business suit. And he describes what he calls the dull turn.
Which is basically the King Kong effect wearing a tie.
Totally. The man turns to face the camera to sell you soap. The feet, the hips, the chest, the shoulders, and the head all blindly rotate at the exact same speed and arrive at the exact same time. Looks like the poor guy is trapped in a full-body plaster cast.
So how do you fundamentally fix a dull turn? You have to virtually slice the character up?
Conceptually, yes, you do. You have to completely stop thinking of the man as one singular object. You have to start thinking of him as a collection of independent entities: head, shoulders, chest, pelvis, legs. And those individual parts act together like a kinetic chain.
So if it's a chain who drives the bus, what part actually initiates the movement first?
Well, there are generally two main options, depending on the acting. If the character is just thinking or reacting to a sound, they might lead with the eyes. The eyes look first, then the head turns, then the shoulders follow, and finally the torso follows.
But what about for a really dynamic physical action?
For a physical, powerful movement, you almost always have to start from the literal center of gravity, the hips.
The hips.
Williams diagrams this so beautifully in the chapter. The hips absolutely must turn first. They generate the raw power for the body. And because the hips turn, they physically pull the stomach. The stomach then pulls the chest pulls the shoulders.
On the head.
The head is the absolute last thing to know what's going on. It heavily drags behind the torso. It might even stay locked looking at the original focal point for a few extra frames before the physical tension in the neck muscles finally forces it to whip around to catch up.
This scene's exactly like sports mechanics, like a professional baseball swing or a golf drive.
It is the exact same physics. It is a kinetic chain. You generate the energy in the heavy core, and it violently whips out to the lighter extremities. When you animate that slight lag between the body sections, even if it is literally just a one-frame delay between the hips and the shoulders, the character suddenly looks remarkably relaxed. They look physically capable. They look like they are actually obeying the laws of gravity.
And there is a really important note here about counteraction, too.
That is the balance component. It's crucial. If your heavy hips suddenly swing forward to the right, your upper torso naturally has to lean back to the left to compensate for that weight shift. Otherwise, you just fall over onto the floor.
Right, simple physics.
In bad amateur animation, everything just tips forward together. The character constantly looks off balance and weird. In masterful animation, you constantly see that tiny, subtle adjustment. Hips go one way, shoulders instantly go the other way. It keeps the center of gravity safely over the feet.
Okay, so we have successfully broken the main torso into blocks. Hips, torso, head. But now we have to actually get into animating the limbs. And this is where the chapter gets incredibly dense and technical. Section 4 is successive breaking of joints.
This is the heavy artillery of the book.
It sounds incredibly painful, to be honest, breaking the joints.
Yeah, it does. It's a very dramatic term coined by Art Babbitt, who was one of the original legendary Disney master animators. He's the guy who basically developed Goofy, so he obviously knew how to make things look incredibly loose and gangly. And breaking in this specific context doesn't mean violently snapping a bone. It means intentionally bending the joint in the exact opposite direction of the primary movement to create maximum drag.
Opposite direction.
Okay.
I definitely need a mental visual for this. Let's do the arm wave example from the book. I want to lift my arm from resting at my side up to shoulder height.
Okay, let's visualize it. In a stiff animation or King Kong style animation, the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist all just lift straight up into the air in a perfectly rigid line. Like a military salute or a toy robot arm swinging up.
Right, just pivoting from the shoulder heads.
Exactly. But in the successive breaking of joints technique, you don't do that. You lead the upward motion with the elbow. The elbow goes UP. But the wrist, you break the wrist downward.
So my hand is basically dangling completely dead towards the floor.
Yes. The wrist is considered broken in the sense that it is bending back against the upward thrust of the arm. So the upper arm bone is rapidly rising, but the forearm and the hand are passively dragging behind it.
Okay, so the elbow leads the charge up.
Now imagine the arm reaches the peak and starts coming back down.
So the elbow starts to drop toward the floor.
But here's where the absolute magic happens. As that elbow suddenly starts to drop downward, the wrist is still carrying that initial upward momentum from the previous move. So for a split second in time, the elbow is actively going down DN, but the wrist is still passively going UP.
They literally cross paths in midair.
This is the successive part of the name. First, the elbow reverses direction. Then a few frames later, the wrist reverses. Then finally, the fingertips reverse.
It creates this beautiful, undulating wave motion.
Exactly. Williams affectionately calls it the Dos Equis movement.
Like a logo for the Mexican beer.
Yes, the double X. If you were to take a glowing marker and track the exact path of the elbow and the wrist in space, through this motion, they form these overlapping figure eights or X shapes. They don't move in straight arcs.
I mean, it sounds amazing, but why go through all this incredible trouble? Why not just move the arm normally?
Because of what Williams calls the paradox of straight lines. This is arguably the most crucial conceptual hurdle in the entire book.
Explain that paradox.
Think back to the really early 1920s cartoons. Rubber hose animation. Mickey Mouse, Felix the cat. Their arms literally didn't have elbows. They were just flexible black tubes.
Like wet spaghetti swinging around.
It was incredibly fluid, yes, but it looked structurally weak. It didn't look like it had actual bone or muscle underneath. Modern animation and actual human anatomy, for that matter, relies heavily on straight, rigid bones. Your upper arm bone is a straight, rigid line. Your forearm is a straight, rigid line.
So we are physically stuck animating straight lines.
But we desperately still want that fluid, graceful feel of the old rubber hose. We want the grace without the mush. So the breaking of joints technique is the ultimate compromise. By leading aggressively with the elbow and heavily dragging the wrist, the overall path of action creates a gorgeous fluid curve in the viewer's mind. The human eye connects the dots and perceives a wave. That the individual parts, the drawings of the bones themselves, remain perfectly straight and solid.
So you get the rock-solid structure of a skeleton with the flowing movement of a noodle.
Precisely. You get the absolute best of both worlds. It's an optical illusion.
There's a really visceral, real-world example in his notes about hitting a table. Like if you're angry and slamming your hand down.
This is the impact application of the rule. If you just take a static drawing of a hand and move it vertically down to hit a desk, bam, and look like a rubber stand. It has absolutely no physical weight. It just looks like a collision of two flat sprites in a retro video game.
So how does a real human actually execute a table slam?
Watch yourself do it next time you're mad. You lift your hand to slam the table. You actually lift your shoulder first. Then you violently drive your elbow down toward the wood. But your hand actually peels backward. Your wrist breaks upward, exposing your palm directly to the ceiling.
So my elbow is leading the downward charge, just like the wave.
The elbow comes crashing down. It physically stops, and then the forearm whips down. The hand is the absolute last thing to arrive at the party. It unfolds onto the table.
Unfolds. That word implies a very specific sequence of events.
It is a strict sequence.
Yeah.
Shoulder, then elbow, then wrist, then knuckles, then fingers. When you properly time that offset in animation, even if it's delayed by just 1 or 2 frames per joint, it completely transforms the action. It goes from a robotic, hollow clunk to a fleshy, devastating slam. You can literally feel the physical impact because you visually watch the kinetic energy travel down the length of the arm.
It's exactly like a whip crack.
It is exactly a whip crack. The tiny tip of the whip moves the absolute fastest out of anything, but it always moves last.
Williams actually mentions that professional drummers and orchestral conductors are the real-world masters of this exact physical principle.
Absolutely they are. A drummer beating a massive bass drum doesn't just move their drumstick rigidly parallel to the ground like a robot. They hold their wrist cocked back until the very last possible nanosecond before impact. That aggressive snap, the sudden straightening of the broken joint, is where all the acoustic power actually comes from.
And the orchestra conductor?
Think about it, if a conductor was stiff and robotic, the orchestra wouldn't have any idea where the actual downbeat was. Conductors are constantly drawing massive figure eights in the air with their elbows and wrists. The sharp snap of the baton is the beat. The sweeping drag beforehand is the preparation. It's entirely about storing up kinetic energy and then violently releasing it.
Let's move smoothly into Section 5, detailed applications. Because we aren't just waving arms around in a vacuum. We have complex hands and extremely expressive faces to worry about animating, too.
The hand clap example he gives here is a stone-cold classic. Williams sternly warns, never just bang 2 hands together symmetrically.
Why, though? I mean, that is literally what a clap is. 2 hands hitting.
Technically, yes. But visually on screen, if 2 identical hand drawings arrive at the exact same pixel in space, at the exact same frame, it looks completely dead. It looks like a computer glitch. It feels visually like hitting a solid brick wall.
So how do you fix a simple clap?
You displace the hit. You intentionally have one hand slide slightly past the other upon impact. Or you have the fleshy bases of the palms touch first, and then the long fingers violently slap together 1 frame later.
A rolling contact instead of a flat hit.
Yes, exactly. And you really have to think about the drag on the fingers themselves during the swing. If you swing your arm wide to clap, your heavy palm is leading the way. Your fingers are relatively long and incredibly light. The air resistance in the room naturally pushes them back, so they trail behind the palm. When the heavy palms finally collide and stop dead, the loose fingers snap forward instantly to close the clap.
If you don't animate that finger drag, what happens?
Your hand just looks like a stiff wooden garden rake. Just a rigid, terrifying claw moving uniformly through space.
Now let's talk about faces. This is where the principles get incredibly subtle. We talked about breakdown faces earlier, but this is about the ongoing flexibility of the facial structure itself while it is in continuous motion.
The human face is a fascinating mechanical combination of hard bone and soft muscle. The cranium, the upper skull, is solid impenetrable bone. It never changes shape. But the lower jaw, the cheeks, the lips, they are incredibly elastic and mushy.
Williams specifically talks about the mechanics of chewing.
Right. Beginners always animate chewing exactly like a wooden nutcracker. Straight up, straight down, up, down. A simple mechanical hinge.
Which looks totally mechanical and weird.
But look at a cow chewing cud in a field, or even just watch a person eating a tough steak. The jaw doesn't just go up and down, it actively rotates. It grinds aggressively side to side.
And the cheeks squish and deform around the jaw.
The soft cheeks squash forcefully right up against the eyes. The nose might wiggle from the muscular tension. The ears might even twitch slightly as the facial skin stretches tight. Williams really emphasizes that you absolutely need to preserve the meat of the face.
Meat.
It sounds a little gross out of context, but it's totally accurate. If you stretch the face way down for a terrifying scream, it structurally needs to get thinner. Basic squash and stretch rules. If you squash it up high for a massive grin, it needs to get much wider. If you just slide individual features around on a perfectly flat, rigid circle, it looks like a cheap sticker on a bowling ball.
Yeah.
We want it to look like a water balloon being aggressively squeezed.
There is a really cool, nuanced acting point here called the double face.
Yes, I love this part. This is advanced character acting. This is where you intentionally break the perfect symmetry of the human face.
The book says one side of the face can show an emotion slightly before the other.
Because we aren't perfectly symmetrical creatures in real life. If you are genuinely surprised, maybe your left eye shoots open a split second before your right eye does. Or, and this is incredibly powerful for deep emotional acting, one side of the face is desperately trying to force a smile, while the other side is still clearly sad and drooping.
The classic brave face, trying not to cry.
Exactly. Internal contradiction creates compelling life on screen. Perfect robotic symmetry creates well robots. Breaking the face down, delaying one side, leading a turn with the nose versus the chin, that is exactly how you pull a truly nuanced, award-winning performance out of a pencil line.
Okay, we have arrived at section 6, the final exam. But first, you get a really quick word on readability.
This is the ultimate sanity check for an animator. All this beautiful flexibility and overlapping action is fantastic, but if the audience can't actually tell what physical action is happening on screen, you have completely failed your primary job.
This is the famous silhouette rule.
Yes. If you entirely blacked out the character with ink, could you still instantly read what the pose is? And ironically, mastering flexibility actually helps this readability. Williams talks heavily about reversing curves.
Can you explain that visual for the listener?
Absolutely. Imagine a woman bending far over to pick a heavy box off the floor. Her spine is curved inward, she's completely concave. Her back looks like a letter C.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When she finally heaves the box up, stands straight, and stretches backward, her spine suddenly becomes entirely convex. It curves the exact opposite way, like a reverse C shape.
And the dynamic snap of the animation happens exactly in that transition.
Exactly. That explosive moment where the spinal curve violently reverses direction is where the raw physical energy becomes visible to the audience. If you capture that specific geometric change clearly in the blacked out silhouette, the action reads instantly to the human brain.
Okay, now for the main event, the Art Babbitt assignment.
The absolute legend of the industry.
So Richard Williams is a young guy working directly with Art Babbitt, this untouchable Disney legend. And Babbitt gives him a seemingly straightforward task: animate a female character swaying gently side to side.
It sounds incredibly simple, right? Just a basic little dance move.
But then Babbitt ruthlessly lists the absolute rules for the assignment. And the rules are frankly terrifying.
Rule 1, the hips absolutely must work in a continuous figure 8 pattern. Rule 2, the head must constantly counter the body movement. Rule 3, the hands must work completely independently of each other. And Rule 4, every single joint in the body must break successively.
It's basically a master-level coordination test, like patting your head, rubbing your belly, and doing calculus simultaneously.
It's animator's worst nightmare. Williams freely admits in the text he was utterly terrified by it. He tried to physically act it out in front of a mirror to figure it out. He quickly realized the timing was incredibly fast. The whole entire cycle was only 1 second total.
So how did he actually solve this impossible puzzle?
He sat down and realized the fundamental secret was the hips. He had to completely focus on the hips as the central engine of the entire system.
Lead with the hips.
When the heavy hips swing forcefully to the right, the lighter torso passively drags behind to the left. That is your core counteraction.
Okay, that makes sense.
And because that torso is currently dragging to the left, the head, which is resting loosely on top of the torso, drags even further to the left.
And what about the independent arms?
The arms just completely trail behind everything like loose silk scarves blowing in the wind. They are totally dead weight. So as the powerful hips violently snap back to the right, the arms are still completely busy swinging left from the previous move. Then, as the main body finally settles into the pose, the loose arms violently whip across the body and settle last.
And the final visual result of all this math.
A completely smooth, hypnotic, organic dance motion. It looks utterly effortless on screen. But if you just moved everything side to side all at once...
You would just look like a wooden metronome. Tick-tock, tick-tock.
Exactly. Completely stiff and lifeless. But by meticulously layering all those minute delays, hips, then torso, then head, then arms, then wrists, he successfully created a continuous fluid wave of energy. That specific assignment is essentially the ultimate graduation exam for mastering flexibility. If you can properly handle all those complex opposing forces and make it look that graceful, you have officially mastered the core principle.
It's just incredible to think about. All these strict rules, overlapping, tracing, breaking joints, figure eights, they are really just elaborate mechanical tricks to fool our lizard brains into seeing a living, breathing thing.
That is exactly the job description. We are literally engineering the illusion of a biological soul using pure geometry and timing.
So let's wrap this incredibly deep dive up. What is the grand overarching lesson here for you, the listener?
The big takeaway is that true flexibility isn't about ignoring anatomy and making spaghetti characters. It is deeply about understanding the transfer of force. Kinetic force travels sequentially through a physical body. It absolutely never hits the whole body at once.
It's exactly like a ripple in a pond.
Like a ripple. Whether you are painstakingly animating a cartoon mouse, an orchestral conductor, or a swaying dancer, the physical principle remains exactly the same. Lead aggressively with the core power source, which is usually the hips or the shoulders. Passively drag the lighter extremities, and successively break those joints to create beautiful fluid arcs out of rigid, straight bones.
And above all else, never, ever settle for the boring mathematical middle breakdown.
Never. Put your breakdown somewhere structurally interesting. Make that middle drawing an actual event.
Now, Williams does drop one final, really provocative thought at the very end of the chapter. A bit of a warning.
Yes, he explicitly warns that we can easily overuse these amazing tools.
The dreaded noodle effect.
If you eagerly break every single joint on every single frame and you drag every single facial feature constantly, your character suddenly looks like they have no skeleton at all. They look terribly mushy. They look drunk or dizzy.
So the real mastery, the art of it all, is in the restraint and subtlety.
It absolutely is. Use the drag and the joint breaks to accent the primary movement, not to define every single frame of your scene. Solid, rigid structure must always come first. Flexibility is just the delicious flavor you carefully sprinkle on top.
So here is a little homework for you listeners. Just watch the real people around you today. Watch your friends when they are deeply engaged in talking. Look closely at their hands.
Are they rigidly moving like a King Kong puppet? Probably not.
But are they actively breaking their joints? Start looking for that invisible whip action we talk about. When they forcefully point at something across the room, does the tip of their finger actually arrive last? When they suddenly turn their head to look at you, do their eyes clearly lead the rotation?
I guarantee you, once you consciously start seeing that subtle drag and overlap in real everyday life, you will absolutely never be able to unsee it. It is literally everywhere.
It really is. It fundamentally changes how you perceive physical movement in the world. Well, thank you so much for taking this incredibly technical deep dive with us today.
Keep practicing and stay flexible.
See you on the next deep dive.